Welcome to the Professor and the Madman with Wes Cecil, PhD, and Milo Redwood. I don't exactly know what we're talking about today. I do know that my name is Tim Quackenbush, and I'm a little bit out of my element, and frankly, I hope you are too. So, what's been on your mind, Wes and Milo?
Well, we're going to have to start today with the Republic, the Republic laws.
Oh, yeah, laws.
The laws,
Yeah.
chapter 4. Milo brought this to my attention about a week back. And what does that say there in old chapter 4, Milo?
It distinguishes between slave doctors and free doctors. That's the gist of it.
And what's the passage say?
You'll have to read it for yourself. But as I recall, it's something like the slave doctor, his or her main job is to get the slave back to work. And so having people come by, and they do say dispensaries, come by the dispensary to be given a drug and sent back because it's good for the whole system to keep the masters happy. So it's not as much about deep healing at all. It's about
not
getting
the health
back.
of the health of the slave.
No. Do you remember what the free doctor is all about?
The free doctor comes in, and this is in book 4 of the laws. You can look this up there, Plato. The free doctor will visit the patient, talk to the patient, earn the patient's trust, talk to the patient's family, talk to the patient's friends to discover what's wrong with the person in a holistic sense, and then only when he comprehends what's happening in the person's life and the origins of whatever is ailing them, then he will recommend a course of treatment in conjunction with the patient, because he's earned the trust and admiration of the patient at this point. That way they can return them together to full health.
Do you have that guy's business card?
Which, when Milo pointed the passage out to me, I thought, well, in 2,000 years, the only thing we've done is lost free doctors.
Good point.
Which got us thinking about this whole notion also of, we don't have institutionalized slavery anymore, but when we have the forms of slavery like that, without the structure of slavery, so our medical system obviously reflects much more the slave doctor approach. You go in as fast as possible. It's just, what's wrong? Here, fix it. Here, take some pills. Okay, get back to work. That's what we want. That's our goal. Generally no greater sensitivity to health. Why, when we've in theory eliminated the greater structure of slavery, the legal structure of an enslaved class, have we maintained the cultural structure, at least in terms of healthcare, and I would argue education, that accompanies slavery? I mean, that to me is we don't have slavery in theory, but intellectually or culturally, we've still got a lot of the elements.
Well, I mean, it seems like we also need to start by getting to the roots. Like, for example, you remember last week or so when I had that silly notion of making a slave-o-meter?
Yeah.
And what this would be, I can't be held responsible for these ideas, but I woke up with this idea that you would have a little, I don't know, some sort of a chart, and an individual could just read a few questions and see. Well, first, here's how I would describe the perfect free person would be, and this isn't original with me, this is old as writing probably, would be someone who gets up in the morning and basically does what he or she wants to do nonstop all day long. Well, a lot of people say that, but when you really, you can tell if they're really doing what they want all day long. I would say that would be the Now, I'm not saying this is possible, but it seems to me like my level of slavery would be on a chart somewhere between the complete free person, which is probably just an ideal. Yeah. It's probably like love. It's something we work toward it, but what's perfect love? I don't know what that is. So I don't know what perfect freedom would be, but my sense is that you can tell how much of your day you're doing what you want. In other words, I do think it's a variation on how free you are. So contrast, if you're getting up and you're probably cursing, putting on your clothes, and then you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if you're miserable because you're going to something thankless or dealing
Yeah.
with
Or
Right.
unless you're willingly doing something thankless. See, this is
Right.
a free person can say, well, this is going to be unpleasant. I don't wish to do this, but I choose to do it anyway.
And how does this enter into it? You just said it, that sometimes we want to be told. Education and is that way also, that we want to be treated like a slave. We want to go in, fix us, educate us, let's get this over with right now, and leave. So in some ways, we make ourselves slaves.
Right.
Yeah, this is the tricky, because we don't have, we don't want to use the term slavery too loosely, because, legalized violence against a class that has no rights is, a historical institution that thankfully we've more or less tried to get rid of in the modern world. But that's what makes me wonder, how is it that we still maintain these structures that you would associate with slavery, right? Because many of the slaves in the ancient world were educated, but they were educated to be useful for their masters. They weren't educated to be useful for themselves.
Well, we're educated to be useful to our masters also.
Well, see, this is the interesting, and it's not that there can't be any overlap there, right? But so much of the concept we have in a situation like education, if you put it on the slave-o-meter, you could ask yourself, am I studying this for me?
Right.
Or am I studying it for someone else? And, and again, this is not going to be a black and white, but you can say, wow, I've always wanted to heal people and help people. And maybe I want to be a doctor, and I want to be a doctor for free men. Well, to do that, you're going to have to go to med school. So you're going to have to you probably take some classes you don't want to take, but you can say, I'm doing this for me so that I can achieve my goals.
Yeah.
But at some point you have to say, well, am I really doing that? When do I become a slave doctor and hence enslaved myself? I'm not doing the kind of medicine I want. I'm not healing the way I want. I'm not learning what I want from medical school. In fact, I can give a great example. One of my friends just graduated from medical school 2 years ago. He's in his third year of residency now. And he went to naturopathic medical school. So, he's got his degree and all that, but it was, sort of the hippy-dippy, lovey, holistic end of things. And that was great. No classes in nutrition, no classes in exercise. And I said, how can you? And he says, I don't know. I don't know how at a school on naturopathy, where you're getting your holistic medical degree, you can still not have a class on either exercise or nutrition on a healthy diet. And he says it's astounding at how ingrained that kind of mechanistic view of the human, and that we're going to just cure some broken part, which is, that's the slave idea. Oh, you've got a broken part, fix it, put him back out there to work. So, yeah, I don't know.
So it goes to Milo's idea. If we really knew what moved the needle on your slave-o-meter, we could all have these, right? And then we'd be able to tell when we've moved into, even though it uses the term loosely.
Yeah.
But we know what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So Milo, there you go. That's your next idea.
Yeah, that as you guys were talking, I was thinking, for the last year, I've been using as a sort of symbol of life, the human heart, the contracting and expanding of the human heart. Because I like in this case, to be completely free, I think the reason we struggle with that is because it's kind of inhuman. In other words, love is a bond. So are we bonding with each other? In other words, this goes kind of to sterner.
Yeah.
Free means to be rid of something. Well,
Right.
if you're rid of everything, is that what you want? That doesn't sound like an existence. It sounds terrible.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like what really is probably close to a key would be if I'm choosing the bonds. And I mean choosing. I'm not talking about getting into some deep debt because some love thing that's gone awry. Like I'm not talking about taking on bonds. See, the will keeps coming up. Like for example, I'm trying to think of an example of where I want to be bonded with someone,
Yeah.
yet I want to be free. See what I mean by the heart? This is what I mean by contracting and expanding. To have complete freedom, is it really? I don't think it's actually possible, and I can't imagine really wanting that.
Yeah.
But what I can imagine wanting is bonding by choice.
Yeah, this is what the ancient world thought of friends. Often, if you read philosophy, they wrote endlessly about friends in Latin and Greek, Chinese actually a fair bit. But this is one of their points: is you're born to your family, but your friends you choose.
Right.
And so that notion of being able to choose but you don't want to not have friends. They said basically friends are a great thing. You want to have friends, but they said friends. To be a friend, you have obligations. Essentially, you reduce your freedom by the number of friends that you have because, they take time, they take energy, they take, investment, they take whatever. And so you're less free the more friends you have. And so generally they thought you didn't want to have too many friends. You want to have a few well-selected friends. But they thought when you had somebody who was a friend, you had obligations. I mean, serious obligations.
Yeah.
Like, you took them in when they went bankrupt or bought them out of slavery if something worse came to worse. And, so that notion, I agree wholeheartedly. As Nietzsche says, don't tell me you're free, tell me your controlling passion.
Right.
Tell me what you've chosen to work towards. Because freedom is sort of, it's good to have the opportunity to choose, but to never choose is sort of makes freedom pointless.
Right.
And it's tricky that way, I think.
Well, I totally understand choosing to have a friend and understanding that there is so much obligation that goes with that if you're going to do it right. What if you choose to have a house?
Yep.
And that entails having a mortgage? Is
Right.
that different?
No, I think it's the same. I think it's the same idea as we said in said edifice. But to know that you're choosing it for you to make
Right.
you thrive.
Right.
If you say I want a house and let's say a ridiculously large garden, and at some point it begins to cause you not to thrive, if you then can't let it go, then what was maybe for 10 years a good thing, well, now it's a bad thing.
Right.
Because now you're no longer free. Your choice has been taken from you. You're unable to now make the next decision, which is to say it was a good idea when I started potentially, but now it's time to move on. Now it's time to let go. So yeah, this is the problem. There is no external absolute judge.
Well, you wouldn't know it until your garden went fallow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. You'd have to say,
Yeah. Here too, though, when I think of choosing the house or property, it seems to me like if the person is enough in themselves to make a clear choice, then they would choose a mortgage that that the house would be in a way a benefit to them. Whereas if I don't feel like I'm enough in myself and I want to show off, then I take on a mortgage I can't really afford. And then now that, in my view, that's just a form of slavery.
yeah.
I'm enslaved to a myth that I'm not enough, which, by the way, at some point we'll definitely need to talk about that.
and not
whole thing.
enough.
Yeah,
But- and
that
I-
thing.
And I
yeah.
think this is a great example of this, which is always, sort of run counter to my thought on this is, if you're buying a house because you love a house and you want to inhabit it, this whole notion of continually trading up houses just makes no sense. I mean, it really,
Yeah.
that's what baffles me is, I don't think everybody should have a house, but if you want a house, buy a house you can love and live and inhabit. But what we tend to do as a culture is we buy the biggest house we cannot afford, at the moment. We're a slave to the mortgage, and the second we get some equity or whatever, or flip it. That's the word. The word is, we flip it and we turn some, maybe we make some money on it, and then we get a bigger house so we can turn that and make some money. And so that's clearly not for the love of a dwelling. This is not about loving where you live and living where you're thriving, right? There's some other external force that's driving you in this, where it's money or progress or status. And then again, I would say you're back to being enslaved in a way. You're in that culture of not willing,
Right.
because you're not buying the house for you.
But I've seen some very aware people fall into that trap.
Well,
The people that I consider to be very aware about that,
Yeah.
to fall into that trap, it
Exactly.
must be very seductive.
We have 100+ years of advertising making sure that we don't make wise decisions.
Well, there is that would be the not enoughness thing. But I do think, and there's so many traps, right? My next wife is going to be a really good one. It is a classic. I mean, it is. Sometimes you see people get divorced, and you think, absolutely, this is great. But we must have all seen it. I mean, I've seen it repeatedly, where you see people getting divorced, and you go, okay, maybe that couple needed to get divorced, but they one or both parties immediately, usually before the divorce is finalized, start dating exactly the person they're currently in the process of divorcing. And you just go, I know, you just look at it and go, wow, this is not, I'm not wrong here.
No, you're not wrong.
I just
I just heard this.
brutal.
I just heard this quote yesterday, and I don't remember where it came from, but I believe it was George Harrison's wife, and she was asked that classic question, the secret to a long marriage, and she said, "Don't get a divorce."
Nice.
But I mean, and so that is that slave, that's again, slave used loosely, this notion of when we're being driven by impulses that are not under our control and by our choice. Is that we have to will. I mean, Milo, you always like to say responsibility, right? How much of your life do you take responsibility for?
Yeah, maybe I hadn't thought of using that also in the whole slave, servant. But one thing, now I've mentioned this before, but until someone shows me that it doesn't hold water, I'm going to keep mentioning it. And that is that, there's a whole lot, when I think of bonds, types of bonds, the erotic bond or the familial bond, what have you, and lots actually, I do think that we can differentiate between chains and roots, and the chain, as you know, will not feed you in any way. It's not a benefit to you. So if you're chained to a mortgage, then I'm going to assume that you bought more house than you needed or did not have an income. You were sold something. Now, whether you were sold it by a broker or sold it by your own, probably a mix. But anyway, the point is, when I think of chains, I don't think of benefit, but I do think of bonds. Conversely, when I think of roots, I think of nutrition, benefit, like nutrition. So a house, as far as I'm concerned, any dwelling, if it's not feeding you, meaning like if it's not benefiting you, then you've made an error.
Yeah.
How you live in it's up to you, but you're basically living an error. If you don't love going home, you are living a mistake. I don't see how there's an argument against that.
Yeah,
I'd be open to it, but I don't see how there is. Yeah.
And I think importantly but both of them fix you.
Right.
See, and this is the thing. This is where I think freedom as a concept is often lacking.
Right.
If you're just pursuing freedom, well, you have no roots.
Right.
And if you have no roots, then you're not getting fed.
Right.
But if you're rooted, you are losing some mobility, metaphorical mobility, but you are also gaining. Yeah. Whereas when you're chained, you're just
chained.
You're just chained.
So connection, right?
Yeah.
So to be connected, I think to be human is to be connected.
Yeah.
It's kind of up to us whether it's a chain that's connecting you or a root And I think there's a lot. I just think that's the kind of the one of the keys is which. And I guess there would be, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example of where it wouldn't be so clear cut, but my sense is it's pretty clear cut.
Well, I think there could be a mix.
Yeah,
I do
guess.
think there could be a mix where you're getting some, you are rooted and you're getting some benefit from that, but it's more chain.
Right. I guess
Or-
so. Yeah.
Is it the type of benefit you get? Is it the things that you do that don't necessarily feed you, but you do for somebody else? Is there a distinction between those two?
Well, in theory, if you're doing it for somebody else because you like them, they're your friend, or you love them, then you should want to do that. In theory, of course. In practice, and we're imperfect, but in theory, then you say, hey, I'm doing this for somebody else, but I feel good about it. Usually people say, I'm sacrificing for somebody.
One of my trigger words.
Tell me how you feel over there, Viola.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, but I think the same way. If you're choosing to do something, then you aren't sacrificing. You're not making a sacrifice. You're saying, I'm doing what I want to do, and what I want to do is help this person or benefit this person or whatever for them. And that makes me feel good, and it makes us feel good, and so excellent.
And it feeds you.
And it feeds me. But if you're like, oh, I'm giving my blood. I mean, we all know, right? Oh.
I got a bad attitude. When someone talks about sacrifice, I just say, then you're a victim. Just go join the mountain of victims then. It's just so boring and old, by the way. But that whole thing that I'm sacrificing, I don't understand. I don't know why. Why would someone choose that? Why would someone choose that?
There's a mountain?
I mean, it just seems like it's a break with just any kind of intelligent, beautiful. It doesn't mean, now mind you, I should say, it doesn't mean a cutoff of feelings. I'm not talking about dropping from feelings. Like I know that some folks will like to pick fights and say, well, you're intellectualizing and that's cold and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am suggesting that following feelings without running them through your little intelligence is a 50-50 at best shot.
Well, now you're just raising like 11 subjects there in 4 sentences. That's beautiful. But I do think on the sacrifice, when again trying to use metaphors, it's like when I go hiking, particularly in the Olympics, half your day you're going to be walking uphill, right?
Yeah.
Just that's what you're going to do, and it is a lot of work. But I don't ever think of that as a sacrifice, because it's just wonderful. It's wonderful to go uphill in the Olympics. It's wonderful to go downhill in the Olympics. It's just wonderful to be in the Olympic mountains. And to go, oh, God, it's like people always uphill all the way to the top of the mountain. It's like, yes, yes, but is it just a sacrifice? Not a sacrifice. It's something you do because you love the whole process. You love the outcome. And it might be a pain in the ass, and your feet might get blistered and bleed in your shoes, but hey, it's worth it, and that's part of the joy of going up in the mountains. But if you're just saying, "Wow, I'm just slogging," and isn't it great? Look, I can slog. Yeah, slogging for the sake of slogging is
that idealistic? I mean, aren't there a lot of people slogging through a career to get to that top of the hill and retire and come down and do what they want? I'm not saying it's I mean,
He's trying to piss you off.
No, that journey to
grab him, Milo, grab him.
That journey to the top of the hill in a career that you despise is in no way fun. I mean, you can think about the backside and coming down after it's all over. I don't know if that's enough to get you through. I don't know if that's enough to psychically make it worth it.
Yeah, so this is one, that notion of, again, that's back to that notion of sacrifice. If you're getting up and saying, well, I just have to do this for 13 more years and then something good happens, I don't understand that. And maybe that's because I don't have a long enough attention span. But if you're saying, hey, this is a lot of work and it's a pain in the ass, but there's a lot of part that I enjoy.
Right.
that I like a lot of it. It could be a lot of it that's not fun, but there's a lot of it that I do enjoy, and there are trade-offs, and I'm like these trade-offs, and I choose these trade-offs, then I don't have a problem with it. The problem I have with the general career notion of that arc, which is the classic arc that we're sold often.
De-sold's more like it. But go ahead.
Yeah, the concept to me is, and this actually happened to me a couple of years ago when the big financial collapse, the state was cutting its budget, so the college was cutting its budget, and nobody knew if we were going to get fired. And so, here comes the deadline. We knew when they were going to announce what was going to happen. And I thought, I've really enjoyed working with the college and the students for the last, 13 years, 14 years at that point. And if I get fired, that's all right, because, it's got to end sometime. And boy, what a great run. I was really good. I could feel good about that. But I know out in the world at the same time, during the financial collapse, people were getting laid off who had spent 13 years working at a job they hated, only to get then fired, which I thought, man, that would really be disturbing and soul crushing, because here you've made all this quote unquote sacrifice for a goal that actually is not in your control. That you're putting your destiny and into somebody else's hands.
But on the other hand, that was made easy for you. You couldn't quit yourself because you hated what you were doing, and all of a sudden, it just happened for you. It fell out of the sky.
That's right.
It may have been the biggest gift.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think sometimes it can be a gift.
Yeah.
Although I then think people generally will run to get more chains, but
Right.
not inevitably. I don't know. So, yeah. Sacrifice. Tell me more about sacrifice, Milo.
Let's see. Well, sacred, to make sacred. Yeah. I just, I guess, we'd have to talk too much about, we'd have to get to basic assumptions on how we are in the world. Like, well, we talked a little earlier about the mythology that were in the Western world. I suppose all cultures have their mythologies. I can't think of a culture that wouldn't have some kind of mythology, but ours is sort of unique in that it starts with nothingness, that I am not enough in my own, which is partially true because we are social creatures. So I guess but when it got turned into that I need to be saved by something, it got a little trickier. It got manipulated, I suppose. So it's almost like we need a discussion on our basic view of what it's like to be a human and what we want to be as a human. And I can't think of a time in history wherein the individual actually can do this now. They actually can decide for themselves which myth, and maybe even create their own mythology, or even live, I suppose, without a myth. I'm a little out on that because it seems to me like even if I can't define it, I'm still living by something, you know what I mean? Like an image. My image of the heart, for example, contracting and expanding, is a sort of, you could call it a symbol of a larger myth. I just like it because it's simple and I'm simple. And I like it that it's all encompassing because it's a symbol for me of life itself. For example, Wes and I on the drive out, we were talking about death and how essential and actually beautiful death is if you're a fan of life. It actually needs to, and to detest death or to ignore or to make up little fairy tales about it, heaven and hell and all that, is kind of like saying, I don't like the contracting part of my heart. I don't like that part. It's a way of dismissing life itself. And so we were discussing a little about how a person could probably do worse than just consider dying well, and then build a life probable or in probability of dying well. So build a life wherein you will die well. We have a mutual friend. He sails. He used to be a corporate man. He sails. And I wonder about a sailor dying out at sea. That sounds like a really great way to go.
Yeah.
Versus, right?
Oh, about 5 years ago, there was a small piece in the Leader, and it was a sailboat that was found circling between Port Townsend and Whidbey Island, just circling and circling and circling. And as it turned out, when people became concerned, they went out to the boat, and the guy had died on the sailboat. And I thought, in the spectrum of ways to go, of being hit by an ice cream truck or, blue ice falling off an airplane, dying on that sailboat, and while you're sailing, I can't think of a better way. The subject of death can be complex.
Yeah, no, there's a great passage in John Muir was up here. He's actually went from Port Townsend actually up to Alaska, and when somewhere along the trip, I think up in Alaska, they went out. He went out. Nobody else did, of course, because there was this big storm, and they were right camping at the base of this glacier. And he said, "Well, you never get to see a glacier in a storm." So he thought he's going to go out there, and he goes out with his dog onto the glaciers and hikes around. And then when he turns around to come back, he discovers that this big chasm has opened up. The glaciers have shifted. And he's like, well, I can either stay on the glacier all night, which I could probably do. If I keep moving, I probably won't freeze to death, but I might. Or there was this ice bridge. He's like, I could try and cross that ice bridge, but if it collapses while I'm on it, then I'll fall to my death. And he was thinking about it, and he finally said, falling into a glacier is a good way to die. And so and of course he survived to write this, but that was his decision. He said, I think I don't mind falling into a glacier. If I'm,
Right.
that's a perfectly fine way to go. And yeah, that is something, we tend not to think about that, but I do think as part of trying to free your mind, one way is to try to free your mind from that fear, because fear is one of the things that controls us. Fear. I think, one reason people build the careers, and I'm not against careers. Some people thrive in them. I mean, it's great for them, and you can see them; they're vital and they have a career. But I think one reason people do is the fear of the unknown, and the big unknown, great, of course, is death. And the Stoics talk about this endlessly. They're like, look, first thing you have to do is overcome that fear to free your mind. And once you've overcome that fear, all your other fears will sort of look small and vanish. And that part of, we tend to think of freedom as external freedom, right? I need to eliminate, we need legal freedom, which is great, legal freedom and legal opportunity, and that's all necessary. But we tend to forget the flip side, which is now I've got to free myself up inside. If I'm controlled by my fears or my desires or my subconscious drives, if those control me, well, then all the external freedom in the world doesn't help. It's just a big trap.
I almost hate to say this,
Uh-oh.
but who were the Stoics?
Okay, no, that's a good question. Who are the
You
Stoics,
know
Milo? You do it, Milo. You know the Stoics.
Well, for one thing, I would say that in terms of their influence, I would say that they had a lot to do with carving Christianity.
Yes, they
When
did.
I think
yeah,
of right, when I think of Paul and let's see, who are the
Seneca,
Aurelius,
Marcus Aurelius,
Epictetus,
yeah. Cicero had
Cicero.
a huge influence by the Stoics.
Now, would you call Emerson a Stoic?
No,
No.
he was just a nut.
Yeah. Anyway, but how would we define what makes a Stoic? A certain toughness.
Well, I think the official definition is they were one. The goal of Stoicism was ataraxia, which was an indifference to your physical surroundings.
Right.
Their central argument was man doesn't control nature. And so you never know. A flood tomorrow, hail, storms, plague could all come, and as long as you find yourself subject to those things, you're not free.
Right.
So their notion of freedom was ataraxia, which was either a balance or an indifference. You did not care if someone, if it basically, and this is, they acted on this. If you're afraid of dying, then all that someone has to do is threaten you with physical violence, and you'll do what they say, which they thought was no kind of freedom at all.
Right.
They said if you're not willing to just stand there and let somebody run you through with a sword, then you're not free.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And so now the original word though is from Stoa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poor. And so I can't. Who would you say the first Stoic?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, Diogenes comes up.
There's so much overlap, but we had Cynics and Stoics, and it seems to me another one of their precepts was withholding judgment, right?
Yeah.
And by that I don't necessarily mean condemnation, but withholding judgment and whether this is good or bad, meaning good or bad, but not so much in a condemning way. Like, for example, a Stoic, let's say a Stoic just had a windfall of $1 million. To be a true Stoic, he wouldn't be excited about it. It'd be neither good. He wouldn't say this is good nor bad because it could be either. It could be either or both. Yeah.
There's a certain Taoist element of saying, we'll just have to wait and see how that turns out, but that you should be indifferent to it.
Yeah.
So that's why they didn't generally pursue either poverty or wealth, because they thought to pursue either was equally mistaken. To unnecessarily impoverish yourself is no brighter than to unnecessarily enrich yourself.
Yeah.
That they were very, again, you had to be sort of indifferent to that external forces. So then that freed you to behave as you thought correctly. And that's another aspect, of course, was reason. They said reason was the great abiding gift of man.
Yeah. Yeah, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about truly one of my favorite books is Meditations, Aurelius, and there are some lines in there that sound like they could come right out of a Zen manual. I'm thinking of the line about the boat. It could be in book 5, but anyway, it's something like you've gotten into the boat, you've made the trip across the river, you've arrived on the shore. Now get out. That's what it says. It says get out.
Get out.
So to use the vessel, and that just sounds very Zen or Buddhist, but something about you've made the trip, you've made the voyage. Now get out. That's the last words of that line, or get out.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. The Stoics had good stuff.
Yeah, and I think that again the emphasis on reason was to overcome the emotions and the desires and cultural issues that cloud your judgment. And so if you were indifferent to pain and suffering of all kind, then that freed you up from those concerns, animal concerns essentially, for your animal nature. And then if you could use your reason to overcome social and emotional drives, then you could get a state where you could judge correctly and act appropriately by your own lights. This is the other thing. It was all to your own. Then you could act as you would.
I like these guys already.
Yeah,
and
really.
What's interesting is many of these concepts we've heard or we are in contact with in the modern world, but the Stoics themselves, the fact that this goes back that far, is kind of buried to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. We lost that genealogy. But I think earlier we talked about education, and I think this is the distinction you can make as far as what type of education on the slavometer. Keep the slavometer going.
Yeah.
Is if you're getting the education that you think you want for you, and not being confused about this, then if someone comes to you, say a teacher like myself, and says, look, if you don't do this, you're going to get a C, then you know whether or not you want to do it. And so you're not supposed to care about the grade. The grade is not while you're there. And while it might be good to get a good grade, it might be good to get a bad grade, quote unquote, good and bad grade. You know, that a Stoic is going to say, look, that's not what's important to me. I have to be indifferent to the goodness or the badness because I just see them as external factors. If I'm getting the education I want, then I'm not worried about that part of it. And you know, that's something we struggle with because we have this not mechanistic, a utilitarian view of education as so much else. You know, what's my education for? What am I gonna? What's it gonna get me? What's the trade-off? And a Stoic would say, no, the education is for you. There's only one answer. It's for you. And if it's not serving you, then get out.
Get out. We go back to Milo's point.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I have a friend that went to art school, and it's always been difficult for me to wrap my arms around just those two words, art school. But what she told me was that art school taught her how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think of, why don't we do more of that in education? Isn't education teaching people how to learn?
No.
I know, but shouldn't it be?
I got that answer.
I mean, shouldn't it be without paying thousands of dollars to go to an art school? I guess that's just the genesis of the thought. But what happened to that concept?
It hasn't taken any kind of root.
No,
Right.
it's the difficulty, well, a couple of difficulties, but one is the old form of education, if we go back to Cicero, Cicero said, who gave us the notion of humanistic education, it's his word, humanism, that the first goal of an education is to teach somebody to care for themselves. Right, part of which would be to teach people to educate themselves, but generally to care for yourselves. Fast forward again 2,000 years, what have we learned? Nothing. What we've learned is the function of education is to indoctrinate you into a system so you can get some reward that the system tells you should want. Be it a degree, be it money, be it recognition. And I think it's simply a dispositional question. If you're predisposed to thrive in that system, then this is great for you. You thrive, you get rewards, and it's healthy for you.
Right.
Statistically, that's not going to be a lot of people, though, just because people are so diverse. And so for most people at any given time, it's simply a system of indoctrination where we tell you things, you repeat them to us, and we say, good on you. Because if you don't, then what do you teach?
Right. Yeah, it seems like to have a culture, or I'd almost rather say to have a collective, and obviously to have individuals. Obviously they rely on each other. So it seems like to have individuals with real critical thinking, you don't want too many of those types. That's not going to work at all. That's like, I don't know, that's like having a brain that's too big for the body, or it seems like to have, as I see it, we have the individual and the health of the individual, his or her needs and all that, and the collective, the group. The two, here too, I like using the heart, but to have the individuals rise up and get empowered as an individual I don't see that as working for the entire. I'm not saying we couldn't use a lot more of a higher population of empowered individuals. I think my sense is we actually could use a few more, but I don't know that that's good for the overall health of the group. Oh, the case in point would be the shaman. Maybe we've mentioned this before, but the tribe. Let's say you had 100 in a tribe. One shaman probably was enough. You can't. I mean, I was thinking of this the other morning. Was leaders and followers. There really is something to the harmony of the overall system not to have too many leader types. I'm using that because the master slave thing's it gets a little carried away. But leaders and followers, I have no way of knowing this, but my guess is you'd probably need 90% followers to have a healthy organism. Again, in a tribe, because can you imagine having? Well, yeah, you can't. It just doesn't work for herds, for tribes, for any group of mammals that I can name to have.
Well, and for
right?
humans to thrive, we're social animals.
Right.
We have to have a society. And I always want to give it a run. I would love to have an education system designed around developing as many high quality individuals as we could. I think it would be a fascinating experiment, if nothing else. But there is always that danger. I mean, this is why the Greeks are another great example. The Athenians voted out. They what do you call it? They didn't vote them to death. They sentenced them to leave the city. What do you call
exile
that? Exile. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. They exile every year people basically based on the notion that they were getting too powerful. And so they would vote, and they would vote someone out of the city for 10 years, and they had to give up all their material belongings because they'd be like, ooh, we like individuals, but that person is too powerful, too individualistic. Let's just get rid of them, because if somebody becomes too powerful, then you get a tyranny, and everybody else loses their liberty, right? That they get crushed. And so there is this dynamic trade-off, but I think we could give it a much better go of seeing people, be healthy, and thrive and focus on. The problem is you can't have a system if you do that, because there is no system. The more of a system you have, the less individual you have. I mean, it's kind of how do you develop a system that has no system, right?
Well, speaking of the system, the shaman doesn't care what you know. He's not going to test you on what you know about what the shaman knows or the shaman has told you. But for instance, I just learned about Stoics by listening to you. So there's no test. I mean, do we need to have a test?
Yeah, we're gonna have a test.
Or is it just a matter? I mean, I guess I'm going back to education, how we do this, how we teach people to learn. You're not going to know how much I know about Stoics,
right,
unless you ask me.
Yeah.
Isn't that a problem?
No. This is back to the whole notion of I think we actually didn't we say this? The whole notion between indoctrination and education.
Yeah.
Educare is to put something in, essentially, and
no, backwards. Educare, lead forth. Indoctrination, to put the teaching in.
Right. Educare is to
lead
pull
forth.
From the outside. Yeah. Pull from. If I educate you, I should be pulling forth what's already in you.
There, out. Yeah.
So if we talk about the Stoics and it resonates with you, that means it was already in there.
It rings.
It rings true to you.
It's already.
I like it,
and and you're not going to forget it because it's you, and we don't forget ourselves, generally speaking. If I have to shove something into you, then you have to try and remember it. Well, now we're back to indoctrination, where now you're trying to force yourself to remember something that actually doesn't resonate or.
Yeah.
So then there is no test.
There is no test.
No. Yeah. Now, the easy way to remember is doctor, teacher. It's the same root, doctor and teacher. So to put a teaching into a person.
Yeah.
And I mean, Socrates and others are very clear on this. They just thought that you already know. And when something rings true, that's just because you already know.
Yeah, they called it anamnesis, the overcoming of the forgetting. Yeah. So that you used to know in a previous incarnation, but you forgot. And so what education really is helping you overcome your forgetting. hence anamnesis, to overcome that you had forgotten, what you had known.
This
That's a beautiful concept.
I love it. But it's
Oh.
very different from here's a book, shove it in your head, and regurgitate it on command.
I swear, I'll have to double check on the exact date, but I was reading this little bit from Jung I think he was writing in the 50s, and in the 50s he wrote something that was like, we're being made stupid by too much information.
Yeah.
This is in the 50s.
Yeah.
Oh, you think about today. Oh,
That hurts.
yeah, it does. So yeah, being made stupid by too much information, because when I look around, I would say if it applied to the 50s, and I do think it was in the 50s, I can't do high math. Like, I can't even tell you how much more information we have now. So how much more stupid are, like,
Well,
right?
this is and this is one of the things they say about having to test students more and have more classes and longer school days, and they just say there's so much more to know, and I mean, I could feel my blood pressure rise. But I go, one, if I told you to drink Lake Washington, you would say I can't. And I say, okay, well, now drink the Pacific Ocean. There's no difference if you can only take in so much. It doesn't matter how much there is. If it's Lake Washington or Pacific Ocean, it's more than you can deal with. So the first thing you have to do is, doesn't matter if they keep adding to it. The Pacific Ocean gets bigger. It doesn't
Good
matter.
point.
It's just, it's irrelevant to the individual, because the individual has a limited amount of capacity, which hasn't changed. And second is, information is, of course, meaningless. It doesn't matter, doesn't help, and certainly doesn't educate in any way. To know a bunch of facts is pointless. Well, this is why, by the way, they use textbooks, because textbooks have the answers in them. If you give somebody a history books generally aren't filled with answers. They're filled with stories and observations and confusions and questions. I'd say basically that's every good history book. Textbooks give you, well, here's a question, sort of vaguely, but mostly it's here's the answer. What does this mean? And when people are telling you what things mean, well, that's literally indoctrination.
Yeah.
But in this flood of information, how do we decide what's important to learn? I mean, there's a lot out there. Do we need somebody? How do we do this? I mean, you do know what I'm saying
Oh
here.
yeah. I would say. I mean, I think it's an intriguing question, because it wouldn't surprise me if we could probably get it boiled down to a few questions, which, if the person just really reflects on them and probably has enough silence to do that well, they could radically change their life for the better for them. Meaning, to make, basically, I look at it as a musical thing. They could tune their instrument with their mind, body, or whatever. And I bet you the question, there wouldn't be many. Like the one that I've used for a couple of years now, that I'll continue to use is, what have you found more important than enjoying your life?
Yeah.
That's one of those things where if you just use that as a starting, like what really is more important, and here's what I'll get. Oh yeah, but it's more than just you. You have that, and then I'm going. Let's just start with you.
Yeah.
Let's start with the individual, and we'll worry about your family and all these other things that are so important and all. But let's start. You might say start at home or own it. That's that old psychological.
Yeah.
Own it, to own it. So start with, I would say something like, start with taking 100% responsibility for your life. Like, will you? Maybe that's the question.
That's a good. Yeah.
Do you take 100% responsibility for your life? And then being very clear with that doesn't mean full control, because chance does that, and that doesn't mean to avoid commitments that you made. But in theory, you did make those. Yeah. So I would say that doesn't have to be exclusive. So maybe that's it. Start with, do I take 100% responsibility for my life?
Yeah.
and then go to what have I found, and then you know what I mean. I think you could actually put together some questions
Yeah.
that
That'd be a
would
good,
do
very good,
maybe more
interesting.
than any
Yeah.
degree.
And then ask, what do I want to know that will help me answer my questions? I think this is the difference. What do I want to know that will help me answer my questions? Because again, if you look at young kids, little kids, they want to know all kinds of things. They want to know how to build things with Legos, and how to butterflies fly, and how to make cookies. And they love to learn things because they want to learn things that they want to know. And at some point, we convert that into teaching them things they don't want to know. And then that's when education gets lost. It's because, now you've got to learn things that you don't want to know.
Yeah.
So we need to come up with a right list of questions.
Yeah, that would be a big.
a lot's riding on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. One, I like with yours, what do you have that's more important than enjoying your life? I would say, what can you do to help yourself thrive? What can you eliminate? What can you stop doing that is
good one.
making you not thrive, or making you sick or less healthy than you might be?
Yeah.
I always put thriving as sort of one of my markers. Is this really helping me thrive, or is this not? And just absolutely asking that. And many of these are moving targets too, because the answer that is correct today, because we don't stop changing.
Yeah.
It's going to be different for different people because people are different. I think there's one of the problems with education is we standardize it ipso facto. It's not good for the fact that there's a diversity of people. What's good for me is not good for other people.
Right.
So what's going to help me thrive? But then even if I answer it correctly today, in 5 years, it might be, that's just not doing it anymore. I mean, I see people, it's sort of a joke, but I think it's true. Young people, like to party and drinking and going out all night, having a big time, and that's great, And you look at them, they look healthy and happy, and they seem to be thriving. So I have no problem with that. But for most people, there seems to be a use-by date on that.
Yeah.
Where
For all people.
for all people, I don't know. I think some people are just party animals
To the very
to
end.
the very end, and they seem to be okay with it. So I'm not critical. It just that's okay for them. But for a lot of people, I look at them and I go, yeah, this is not 5 years ago, maybe this was just great for you and it was making your life wonderful and beautiful, and that's. But now, no, I don't think so. And that's the interesting thing, is this is not a moral judgment, because the behavior hasn't changed.
Yeah.
You're not saying the behavior is bad. Other people it might be good for. It might have been good for you then, but how is it working for you now? And who knows? Maybe in 5 years it'll be good for you again.
Yeah.
And that variability is the other thing I think education loses track of a lot. Or we lose track of, not just education, but as individuals, that I'm not the same person I was in some ways 10 years ago, 20 years ago. In some ways I am, but in some ways not. I'm trying to, this is one thing the Stoics were looking at. How do you, adjust for that?
Yeah.
What are the differences in teaching a younger person and teaching an older person?
Ooh.
Or are there any?
What's younger and older?
19 and 45.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a good question. What's the difference you see when you talk to young people versus older people?
Yeah, I'd probably have to think about that.
That's an interesting
Yeah,
question.
that may be a little bit.
No, that's
way out there.
It's a very good. I like this question because it is.
I mean, I know I'm a different person than I was at 19.
Yeah.
I surmise that I am teachable in a different way.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that is, because it's like you said, we change so quickly. But I can't imagine being a teacher and trying to sort through that difference.
How about that? I think I have an idea. First, we'd probably have to ponder on what we are teaching. But if we're talking about life, living well, then now I'm not sure this is true, but it could be. To a 19-year-old, I think I would be, we'll say him, I would probably be telling him or teaching him, I suppose, giving him ideas on what he could try, because he's new in the world. He's still new in the world, so he's at the start. So I think, now this is being very general, but I think generally I would maybe be giving him ideas. Like one idea I get when young folks come by, sometimes I do open studios, and I love to see young folks because they're on the start. And so I love it when they, for example, occasionally they'll be on a road trip. And so they stop at the studio and they're on this big road trip. And I love it because a 19-year-old, really, I do think should be traveling. Like that is part of, in my view, that is education, traveling. A road trip for a year. Oh, anyway, so generally I would say that I would encourage a 19-year-old to try new things and do this. A 45 or any age, I would say past, say 35, I would probably suggest things maybe to stop doing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a very good. That's good.
Unlearning versus learning.
That is
right. I'm thinking at 35, if you're still doing stupid stuff, then someone should take you aside and go, maybe you could stop doing that.
Yeah.
Like stop hanging out with people that are just chains, that are you're not benefiting them and they're not benefiting, like little things so it seems to me like unlearning becomes much more important later. Again, generally speaking, there are some things a 19-year-old could unlearn, but my sense is he probably needs to learn. He needs to add, subtract. Maybe that's it.
Subtract.
Yeah, I'd go later. Subtract.
Maybe that's what makes 19 so beautiful.
Yeah. No, it's a really
Well, and I think, I actually do this a fair bit at the college. I think another distinction for someone who is younger, that, like you say, like they lack experience,
right?
And so trying to suggest experience for older people who do have experience, it's also trying to suggest ways to reflect differently on the experiences they've had. So you've had a catalog of experiences. So if you can get a different perspective on them, well, you've got a much larger sort of sample size to go, oh, if I look at it this way, then that they've got a whole bunch of things that change about, because they have so much more experience, that if they can, again, change their viewpoint, wow, that alters a lot, as opposed to a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because one of the examples I use about thinking is I said, the reason you want to think clearly is because mistakes are painful. They're educational often, but painful. And I said, some of us at some point you will go out and date with somebody who ends up being just horrible for you. And everybody but you knows it. And there's no way to communicate this to the person involved. It just turns out to be universal. You just can't communicate it to them. And that resonates with everyone who's had that relationship. But if you're young enough, you may not have had that relationship yet.
Right. Good point.
And so, that is the other thing, is certain things don't. But
why is that everybody listening to this right now knows exactly what you're talking about?
Because it's true. I mean, there is that, and this is what, one of the reasons I like to think about thinking is because, one, that's the mistake we've pretty much probably everyone made, but it's a really painful mistake. But it's also one that pretty much invariably the rest of the world can see you making, and all your friends will talk about, oh, this is going to be painful.
I know. And then
I mean, it's just funny. I don't know.
First of all, when we think of mistake, think of making a film and it's a mistake, right? You do a mistake.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, think of all the art and music that would not have, let's just say art and music that would never have come about had it not been for just stupid love affairs and breakdowns
Yep.
would Dylan how many songs would Dylan have made?
No, I think it's and that's another perspective thing is to say it's not wrong to have that happen.
Right.
Again, this is the wrongness, rightness that we get trapped in.
Yeah.
I was wrong. Well, you made some errors. You were thinking incorrectly, but you were thinking incorrectly in the perfectly human way.
Yeah.
And sort of having more. Another thing is just, I think this is maybe to answer part of your question. Another difference is sometimes older people are more forgiving,
Right.
because they just recognize, oh yeah, these are the mistakes that people make.
Right.
Or that was me.
Or that was me. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've made
yeah.
that mistake. Everybody I know has made that mistake. The fact that you're making the mistake is like a yes. Yes, these are the mistakes that we make until we hopefully.
This is why we love old people.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
Yeah.
why my daughter loved her grandmother.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Because he's so much more forgiving. Going,
Yeah.
oh yeah, sure, absolutely. We've all shot somebody, it happens.
How many was?
Not that many.
Well, we have been at the intersection of art and life. Milo Redwood talking about art. Somehow it has weaved itself into this whole discussion. It's very, very true. When you teach people art, how much it's similar to what you do, Wes.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
This has been The Professor and the Madman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tim.
Thank you.